The wind swept across the valley in long, mournful sighs, carrying with it the smell of smoke from far-off pine woods and the faint metallic taste of snow that lingered on the air before a storm. Daniel Crowther pulled his old duster tighter around his shoulders and pressed his heels lightly to his horse's flanks, urging the animal down the narrow trail that wound between black rock outcrops. 3 years of wandering had brought him to this corner of New Mexico territory, a land half wilderness and half dream, where each dawn seemed to promise both danger and redemption. He had not come here seeking either. Truth be told, he had not been seeking much of anything since the night he buried his wife and the child she had died trying to bring into the world. The grave on the hill outside Santa Fe had closed not only over their bodies but over every plan Daniel had once carried in his chest. What remained was a man drifting, surviving, keeping himself alive, mostly out of stubbornness. That morning the trail was quiet until a sound shattered the stillness. It was not the cry of a hawk or the groan of timber in the wind. It was sharp, human, and desperate, a child's scream cutting through the canyon like a knife. Daniel reined up at once, head turning. For a moment he thought memory was playing tricks on him, because he had heard that exact kind of cry once before long ago when his younger sister had been caught in a hunter's trap in Missouri. But this was no ghost. The sound came again, carried on the wind, high-pitched and terrified. Without hesitation, he swung down from the saddle rifle, sliding into his hands with the practiced ease of a man who had spent too long in hostile country. He murmured to the horse, "Easy there. Duke won't be gone long," and started toward the cry. The ground crunched under his boots, frozen hard from nights of bitter cold. Around him, juniper and pinon twisted against the sky. He kept low, listening. The cry came once more, and with it the snarl of an animal. He knew that sound as well, the deep, guttural growl of a mountain lion. Heart tightening, he moved quicker, weaving between the rocks until he came to a small clearing, no bigger than a barn floor. There he saw them, two children, backed against a fallen log, their dark hair tangled, their clothes ragged. A lean cougar crouched in the snow 10 paces from them, tail twitching, yellow eyes locked on its prey. The older child, perhaps 8 or 9, held her arms wide as if her small body could shield her younger brother from death. Daniel didn't think. He raised the Winchester, aimed, and fired. The crack of the shot slammed against the cliffs. The cougar leapt and then collapsed, a dark heap staining the snow crimson. For a long moment the clearing held only silence, broken by the children's ragged breathing. Daniel lowered the rifle slowly, not wanting to frighten them more than they already were. The girl's eyes were wide, fierce, and suspicious, far too old for her young face. She did not move even when the boy whimpered and pressed closer to her side. Daniel crouched, resting the rifle butt in the snow. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, steady. "It won't hurt you anymore." The boy blinked at him, but the girl did not relax. She studied him with the careful intensity of someone who had learned the world could not be trusted. Daniel unscrewed his canteen and held it out. The boy reached forward, but the girl caught his wrist, examining Daniel first before finally nodding once and letting her brother drink. Only then did she take a sip herself, never breaking eye contact with the stranger who had stepped from the shadows of the wilderness. Their clothing was deerskin, patched and worn thin. It was no protection against the storm building on the horizon. He tugged off his coat, rough wool lined with old fleece, and held it out. "Storm's coming," he said. "My cabin isn't far. You'll freeze if you stay here." The girl hesitated, then wrapped the coat around both their shoulders. The boy, small and weary, leaned into her. Daniel straightened, gesturing back toward the horse. "Come on," he murmured. "I'll take you somewhere warm." The trek back felt longer than it was. Clouds rolled in heavy and gray, swallowing the pale sun. When they reached the horse, the boy reached a tentative hand to stroke its neck, and Duke only snorted, patient. Daniel lifted them both onto the saddle and led the animal by the reins. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then thick enough to blur the ridges. Soon the outline of a cabin came into view. Rough logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney pushing a thin ribbon of smoke into the white sky. Daniel had built it with his own hands, not out of hope but necessity. It had served as shelter, nothing more. Now, with two children huddled close to each other on his horse, he wondered if for the first time in years it might become something else. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with the scent of wood smoke. He set the children near the fire, adding more logs until the flames leapt bright. He put beans to cook in a pot and sliced a heel of bread, placing food before them. The boy ate eagerly, the girl cautiously tasting each bite before letting him have more. Their quiet voices in a language Daniel did not understand filled the cabin with a sound it had long been missing. He sat back in his chair listening, feeling something stir in him he had thought dead. When the boy's gaze wandered to the mantel, he pointed at the only decoration in the room, a framed photograph of a woman with kind eyes. Daniel's throat tightened. "That was my wife," he said quietly. "She's gone now." The children did not respond, but the girl's eyes softened just for a moment. Later, when he asked their names, she finally spoke. "Aya," she said, pointing to herself, then to her brother Coda. Daniel touched his chest. "Daniel." She nodded once acknowledgement, but not trust. Still, when night came and exhaustion pulled them under, he spread his bedroll near the fire for them and stepped to his own cot, listening to their breathing fill the cabin. For the first time in 3 winters, the silence did not crush him. Instead, it carried a fragile sense of possibility, as if something long buried might still have life enough to grow. Dawn broke gray and bitter, the kind of cold that made breath hang heavy in the air like smoke. Daniel woke instantly, senses sharpened from years of living alone, where danger never announced itself politely. The children were still curled near the banked fire, Aya's arm wrapped protectively over Coda's small body. He pulled on his boots, stepped outside and scanned the snow. Tracks crisscrossed the clearing, deer, rabbit, and something heavier. He crouched, brushing frost from the prints. Horses, at least 2, maybe 3. Riders had passed nearby during the night. His jaw tightened. In this part of the territory, strangers seldom brought good fortune. By the time he returned inside, the children were stirring. Coda rubbed his eyes, yawning, while Aya sat up, instantly alert. She watched him the way a hawk watches movement in the grass. He set bread and beans before them again, then poured coffee for himself. As they ate, he studied them in the firelight. The girl carried herself with an authority rare for someone so young. She reminded him painfully of how he imagined his own child might have looked had life turned out differently. He pushed the thought away before it could tighten around his heart. Mid-morning brought the sound of hoofbeats. Daniel's hand found his rifle before the children even noticed. Outside, a lone rider approached through the swirling snow. It was a woman wrapped in a faded blanket, dark braid falling over her shoulder. She halted at the edge of the clearing, scanning the cabin with sharp eyes. Behind Daniel, the door creaked and Aya rushed out, voice breaking into a cry. "Ina lay!" The word burst from her like a prayer. The woman slid from her pony and dropped to her knees in the snow, gathering both children into her arms. Their rapid words in Apache tumbled over one another, too quick for Daniel to follow. But the meaning was clear. Their mother had come. Nia, she called herself, when she finally lifted her gaze to meet his. Pride and wariness mingled in her expression. "You helped them," she said carefully in English. "I am Nia." Daniel nodded once. The relief in her face when Aya and Coda clung tighter to her was so fierce it made him look away. He had not seen love like that in years. Inside the cabin, Nia sat near the fire with her children, her presence filling the space as naturally as if she had always belonged. She explained in halting English that she was of mixed blood. Her father had been white, her mother Apache. Both families had cast her out after the death of her husband, leaving her to wander with her children. "Our way says life saved must be repaid," she told Daniel. "I offer service in your home for my daughter's lives." Daniel frowned. "You don't owe me. I just did what needed doing." Nia's dark eyes searched his face. "I have nowhere to return. My people see only half-blood. Settlers see only Apache. A woman alone with children dies in these lands. This is not payment. This is survival." Her voice was steady without pity. It was truth laid bare. For 3 years, Daniel had kept himself apart from the world, telling himself solitude was safer than the pain of connection. Now here was a woman who threatened that fragile balance, not by force, but by necessity. He looked past her to the storm clouds gathering beyond the window. "Winter's coming hard," he said finally. "You can stay until spring, then decide your path." Nia inclined her head. Until spring. Days slipped into weeks. The cabin that had once echoed with emptiness now carried the quiet sounds of living children's laughter, the scrape of Nia's needle through cloth, the low murmur of voices at night. She mended Daniel's shirts without comment, rearranged his supplies so nothing went to waste, and showed him which roots and berries could stretch their provisions. Aya, solemn and sharp-eyed, began to ask for English words, pointing to objects until he named them. Coda shadowed Daniel through chores, proudly handing him nails or tools, as though each small contribution made him indispensable. Daniel found himself watching Nia when she thought no one noticed. The way she moved through the cabin with calm assurance. The way she braided cordage with quick-skilled hands. There was strength in her quiet, and it unsettled him. At night when the fire burned low, he lay awake listening to her breathe softly on the other side of the room. The silence no longer pressed in on him like a weight. Instead, it carried a warmth he had forgotten could exist. One evening as snow fell thick outside, he brought out a small carved set of chess pieces he had whittled years earlier, but never used. Aya's eyes widened. "What this called?" she asked. "Chess," he said. "It's a game." "Teach me," she demanded. So he did, explaining the moves of pawns and rooks while she memorized each word. Nia watched from the hearth, a faint smile touching her lips. Yet not all visitors brought such quiet comfort. Late in January, hoofbeats sounded again. Two men from a settlement 20 miles east dismounted in the clearing. Frank Miller and Jim Dawson had traded with Daniel on occasion, but little more. Miller's eyes went straight to Nia standing in the doorway. "Didn't figure you for taking up with Indians, Mercer," he drawled. "Their business is their own," Frank Daniel answered evenly. "What brings you here?" Dawson spat into the snow. "Army's been having trouble with renegades up north. Folks are nervous about Indians hiding out." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Nobody's hiding, just waiting out winter." Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Colonel's got a militia forming. Cleaning house come spring. Best not get too comfortable." They rode away, but their words lingered like smoke after gunfire. That night, Nia's knuckles whitened around the spoon she held as she stirred the beans. "They fear what they do not understand," she said quietly. Daniel watched her, realizing for the first time how much she carried alone. Grief, rejection, survival. "Those men won't decide what happens here," he told her. She lifted her gaze steady and unflinching. "They already have," she replied. After the children slept, she spoke of her life. The mission school that taught her letters but not belonging. The marriage that defied both families. The death that left her wandering. "Too white for my mother's people, too Apache for my father's," she said softly. "I have walked between worlds all my life." Daniel poured coffee, handed her a cup, and studied her hands. They were steady, capable, the hands of someone who endured. She asked him then, "What do you see when you look ahead?" The question struck deep. For 3 years, he had seen nothing but empty days strung together. Now the future shimmered at the edges, uncertain, dangerous but no longer blank. "Don't know yet," he admitted. "But I'm starting to look." The howl came before dawn, long and mournful, close enough to jolt Daniel awake, with his hand already reaching for the rifle propped against the wall. The fire had burned low, casting only faint light across the cabin. Nia was already on her feet, bow in hand, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had been alert long before him. She touched Aya's shoulder, whispered in Apache, and guided both children to the farthest corner. Coda whimpered, but Aya hushed him, holding him tight. Daniel pushed the door open, a cracked cold air biting at his lungs. Shadows moved across the yard, low and quick. Wolves. 5, maybe 6, circling the corral, where Duke stamped nervously, his breath steaming in the frozen air. The pack had grown bold hunger, driving them too close to human scent. "They've been watching 3 days," Nia said quietly, eyes on the window slit. I listened. Daniel frowned. He had not noticed, and that fact unsettled him more than the wolves themselves. She handed Aya a small quiver of arrows and positioned herself at the side window. He moved to the door, rifle ready. Outside, snow-muffled sound, but the wolves' growls cut through, sharp and hungry. When the first wolf leapt for the corral fence, Daniel fired. The crack echoed across the valley, and the animal collapsed midair. The rest scattered, but only for a moment. Hunger pulled them back. Another darted toward the chicken coop at the cabin side, only to crumple with Nia's arrow buried in its throat. Daniel spared her a glance, steady hands, unwavering aim. She was no stranger to survival. The wolves regrouped, circling tighter. The children huddled together but watched with wide eyes, absorbing every movement. Dawn crept slowly, painting the snow pale blue. Daniel chambered another round, heart pounding, when he noticed movement beyond the tree line. Not wolves this time, riders. 4 men with rifles slung across saddles. His stomach sank. More trouble, he muttered. Nia's expression hardened, bow still drawn. The wolves we know are not always the most dangerous. The riders halted at the edge of the clearing. Frank Miller sat at the front, mock greeting in his raised hand. Heard some shooting, he called. Figured Mercer might need help. Though looks like your squaw's got it handled. His eyes flicked toward Nia at the window, lingering too long. Daniel stepped onto the porch, rifle lowered but ready. Got it under control. The bearded man behind Miller spat into the snow. Word is you've gone native, Mercer. Living with Indians. Turning your back on your own kind. Daniel's voice stayed even. My business, my property. You can ride on. Miller's smile sharpened. Maybe we don't feel like riding. Colonel says all Indians not on reservation land are fair game. Best not get too comfortable with your arrangement. The wolves had retreated to the tree line, but their yellow eyes still gleamed, silent witnesses to the standoff. Daniel raised his voice so all could hear. This woman and her children are under my protection. Any man who threatens them answers to me. Miller's face darkened. You choosing them over your own kind, Mercer? Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm choosing what's right. A tense silence stretched. Nia stepped softly into the doorway. Bowstring pulled tight, her presence, a quiet but unshakable statement. The riders shifted in their saddles, calculating. Finally, the bearded man spat again. You're making a mistake, Mercer. Spring's coming and things are going to change. Maybe, Daniel said, but not today. Miller gave a curt nod. We'll be seeing you. With that, the men wheeled their horses and disappeared into the trees. Only then did the wolves melt away as well, leaving behind bloody snow and heavy silence. Nia lowered her bow, slowly, fingers trembling only after the danger passed. Her hand brushed Daniel's arm, tentative. They will return, she whispered. He nodded. Reckon so. For the rest of that day, the cabin carried a new weight. The children played softly, voices hushed. Daniel worked on repairing the fence, each hammer strike ringing like a warning. Nia moved through the cabin with her usual quiet efficiency, but her eyes strayed often to the tree line. When night fell, she sat across from Daniel at the table, her fingers braiding strips of sinew into cord. When spring comes, she began, her voice steady. We will have to leave. Daniel shook his head. Spring's just a season, doesn't decide anything for us. Her fingers stilled briefly on the cord, then resumed. She repeated softly the word, carrying both hope and fear. He looked at her across the dim firelight. The cabin no longer felt like a hollow shelter, but like a place filling with life. Aya and Coda slept curled together nearby, their small breaths steady. Daniel found his voice. Us, he confirmed. Weeks passed. Winter's grip loosened slowly. Snow melted in patches, revealing stubborn green beneath. The cabin itself began to change, transformed by the children's hands and Nia's touch. Carvings decorated the porch posts where Aya practiced with the knife Daniel had given her. Coda lined the windowsills with pine cones and odd stones he collected. Bunches of herbs hung drying from the rafters. Laughter sometimes rang against the log walls, a sound so new it startled Daniel each time. He learned the rhythm of their presence, and with it something inside him shifted. He no longer woke each morning to emptiness. Instead, he woke to Nia preparing food, to children arguing softly over chores, to the hum of voices blending into the heartbeat of a home. And when he sat on the porch, mending tack or sharpening tools, he found himself looking forward rather than back. Still, the memory of Miller's threat hung like a shadow. Daniel knew spring would bring more than thawing snow. It would bring decisions, and perhaps another fight. But for the first time in years, he did not face it alone. March brought longer days, though the night still carried a bite sharp enough to freeze water in the buckets left outside. Daniel rose early each morning, splitting wood or checking traps, while Aya and Coda learned the rhythm of chores around the cabin. Coda followed him everywhere, eager to prove himself, handing tools or balancing small bundles of kindling in his arms. Aya, older and more careful, often remained near, Nia practicing English words while helping her mother prepare meals or weave cordage. The cabin was no longer silent. Daniel found himself listening to the murmur of voices, the occasional laugh, even the quarrels between the children, as though they were proof that life had returned to a place once ruled only by grief. Nia, for her part, moved with quiet certainty. She had taken what little they had and stretched it, turning meals into feasts of ingenuity. Roots dug from beneath the snow, herbs gathered from hidden places, the last of the beans flavored with dried berries she'd foraged. Daniel had lived on coffee, jerky, and stale bread for years. Now he tasted warmth in every bowl. Some evenings when the fire crackled low and the children slept, Daniel and Nia would sit at the table across from one another. He carved small toys for Coda, a horse, a bear, a crude chess knight. Nia braided sinew or patched worn shirts. Conversation came slowly at first, halting words exchanged across the gulf of silence. But gradually something softer grew. She told him of her childhood at the Mission School of Letters and numbers learned under watchful eyes that never let her forget she was neither fully welcome nor fully trusted. She spoke of her husband killed in a raid and of the long road that had brought her here. Daniel shared little but enough of his wife Sarah, of the night he lost both her and their child, of how he had fled into the wilderness to escape the hollow echo of loss. Nia listened, her eyes steady, neither pitying nor dismissing, just listening. For a man who had lived in silence, that was a kind of salvation. Spring crept closer, though winter resisted every step. Patches of green widened, birds returned, streams began to run free of ice. Yet with the thaw came tension. Riders appeared more often on the horizon. Sometimes Daniel saw them from a distance settling back into the trees before they came near. Once Aya spotted smoke far to the east, and Daniel knew the settlement was restless. Rumors would be growing sharpened by fear and ignorance. One afternoon, Miller and Dawson returned. They rode up bold as brass rifles across their saddles. This time, 3 more men came with them. Daniel stepped outside before they could dismount. Rifle held loose but ready. Nia stood in the doorway, her bow in hand, her children behind her. "Colonel Bradley's calling for all Indians to be moved to the reservation," Miller said, voice carrying the smug confidence of a man certain he held the law at his back. "Those who don't go willingly, well, the militia will handle that." Daniel's jaw tightened. Nia and her children aren't going anywhere. They're safe here. Dawson spat into the dirt. "Safe? You think you can stand against the army, Mercer, against your own people?" Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "I've already made my choice." For a moment, silence stretched, broken only by the restless stamping of horses. The men exchanged glances, then Miller leaned forward in his saddle. "Spring's not far. When the snow melts, we'll be back. And if you're still here with them, you'll answer for it." They turned and rode off, but their threats hung heavy. That evening, Nia sat across from Daniel, her face composed, but her hands clenched around a cup of coffee. "They will not relent," she said. "They see only what they fear." Daniel studied her. "So what do you see?" She met his gaze. "I see paths. One that leads north to danger and exile. Another that stays here to danger and defiance. Neither is easy." He nodded slowly. "Life rarely is." Her expression softened. "And yet I would choose the harder path if it meant my daughters had a place to belong." His throat tightened. "Then maybe that's the path we take." In the weeks that followed, the cabin became both fortress and home. Fences were strengthened, supplies gathered, hunting trips doubled to stock meat. Daniel taught Aya how to aim the rifle, steadying her small hands until she could hit a bottle set on a stump. Nia watched with pride but also a mother's fear. Coda practiced with a wooden bow, his determination fierce despite his size. But amidst the preparation, life flourished. Flowers began to poke through melting snow. Coda chased butterflies across the yard while Aya carved patterns into porch posts. Nia filled the rafters with bundles of drying herbs, their scent filling the cabin with life. And Daniel, for the first time in 3 years, allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he and Nia sat side by side on the porch steps watching the children play. Silence stretched comfortably between them. Finally, she spoke. "You said spring decides nothing, but it seems to me spring has already decided something for us." He turned to her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "And what's that?" "That winter does not last forever. That something new can grow even here." Her words sank deep, more powerful than any oath. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it, and in that simple touch, the long years of grief loosened their grip. April came with the sound of running water streams breaking free from ice and tumbling down the slopes in silver ribbons. The valley smelled of wet earth and pine, a promise of renewal in every gust of wind. Daniel sat on the porch, mending a bridle, while Coda played nearby, chasing a butterfly with clumsy determination. Inside the cabin, he could hear Aya's voice mixing with Nia's half Apache, half English, weaving together the two worlds they had been forced to straddle. The cabin itself bore signs of change. Crude carvings decorated the porch posts, Aya's handiwork with the knife Daniel had given her. Coda had lined the windowsills with pine cones and stones, treasures from his wanderings. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, filling the air with a fragrance that reminded Daniel of life instead of loss. For the first time in years, the place felt like a home. Yet danger lingered like a shadow. Every rider in the distance, every snap of branches at night reminded Daniel of Miller's threat. Militiamen were restless, their fears sharpened by rumors of renegades. Daniel knew they would not simply forget. And yet as he watched Coda laugh in the sunlight, he understood something had shifted in him. He was no longer a man waiting for the end of winter. He was a man fighting for spring. Nia joined him on the steps that evening, settling with the grace of someone who had learned to carry herself lightly, despite the weight of the world. Her eyes followed her children, but her hands rested calmly in her lap. "The path north will soon be open," she said quietly. "We could travel to Colorado, find my husband's kin." Daniel studied her face, the calm strength that never wavered. "Is that what you want?" She hesitated, smoothing the fabric of her skirt as she often did when gathering thoughts. For years, survival was enough, each day only about the next. Now I wonder, what grows after winter ends perhaps more than survival? She turned her gaze to him. "What do you see when you look ahead?" Daniel Crowther. The question had haunted him since she first asked it weeks before. He set down the bridle and looked at the cabin, the yard, the children. "For 3 years I was half alive, walking through days without feeling them. Then you and the children came. This place was just shelter. Now it's something else, something worth holding on to." Her lips parted as if to answer, but before she could speak, hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Both of them stiffened. Daniel reached for his rifle, Nia for her bow. The riders came into view, 4 men, rifles across their saddles. Miller led them, his expression hard. They halted at the edge of the clearing. "Colonel says all Indians, not on reservation land, are to be removed," Miller called. "Some folks reckon you've lost your mind. Mercer living with them. We came to give you one last chance." Daniel stepped forward, rifle cradled but ready. "I don't need another chance. They stay." The bearded man behind Miller spat. "Then you're against us." "I'm for what's right," Daniel said evenly. "And what's right is that this woman and her children deserve to live free." Nia stood in the doorway, bowstring pulled tight, her children behind her. Her presence was silent but unmistakable, a vow to fight if it came to it. The men shifted uneasily. The wolves of winter had retreated, but human wolves remained, circling with suspicion and hate. For a long moment no one moved. Then Miller shook his head. "You'll regret this, Mercer. When spring's in full, we'll be back, maybe with more than words." They wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving the threat heavy in the air. That night, the firelight flickered across Nia's face, showing determination mixed with fear. "They will return," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." Days passed with unease. Traps were checked, fences reinforced, weapons kept close. Aya practiced her English and her chess, asking Daniel endless questions about pawns and knights. Coda shadowed him constantly, eager to be part of every chore. And Nia, though burdened, carried herself with quiet dignity, her strength holding them together. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and violet, Daniel found himself standing beneath the cottonwood tree at the edge of the clearing. Nia approached her steps, slow but certain. "When spring comes, will you still ask us to stay?" she asked. He met her eyes, steady and clear. "I won't ask. I'll tell you plain. I want you here. Not because of debt, because of choice." Her breath caught, and for the first time he saw her mask of composure falter. "Then it is choice for me as well," she whispered. The next morning, beneath that same cottonwood, they made their promise. No preacher, no papers, no rings. Just hands clasped, eyes meeting, and words spoken in the quiet dawn. Aya and Coda stood as witnesses, solemn but smiling. "You saved my children," Nia said, her voice steady. "But more, you saved me from a life without hope. That is a debt repaid only with a lifetime." Daniel's throat tightened. "No debt between us now, just choice. And I choose us." The words hung in the morning air, simple and binding as any vow. The family at the Crossroads cabin was born not from bloodlines or tradition, but from decision and devotion, stronger than the threats gathering on the horizon. Spring spread slowly across the valley, turning snowdrifts into streams, in streams into rivers. The cottonwood trees unfurled tiny green leaves, and wildflowers pushed through thawed earth in stubborn bursts of color. The world seemed to breathe again after months of holding its lungs tight against winter. Daniel felt the change in his own chest. Mornings no longer carried only the weight of routine, but also the steady rhythm of purpose. There were mouths to feed, chores to share, laughter to expect. The children thrived in the gentler weather. Coda raced through the meadow with unending energy, chasing birds and tumbling in the grass. Aya grew sharper by the day, switching between Apache and English, with ease as testing new words on Daniel, until he smiled at her persistence. She beat him at chess for the first time one rainy afternoon, her triumphant grin brighter than the fire crackling behind them. Nia watched all this with quiet satisfaction, though shadows still lingered in her eyes when she thought no one noticed. One morning, Daniel rode out to check traps along the ridge and found signs that unsettled him. Hoof prints fresh, too many to belong to wandering hunters. He followed them far enough to see smoke rising from the east, too close, too many. The militia was gathering. He returned home with jaw set tight. Nia read his face before he spoke. "They are coming," she said. "Not today," he answered, "but soon." She nodded as if she had expected nothing else. "Then we prepare." The next weeks were filled with a strange mix of fear and hope. Daniel worked with renewed urgency, strengthening the corral, sharpening weapons, stockpiling what food they could. Nia taught the children skills that might one day save them: how to move silently through the woods, which plants healed wounds, how to find water in dry earth. Aya practiced with her bow until her arms ached, while Coda carried small bundles of firewood, as though each stick was a soldier in his army. Yet amidst preparation, life still blossomed. The garden they planted together began to sprout tiny green shoots, promising future harvest. Laughter still echoed when Coda tumbled face first into the dirt, or when Aya insisted on teaching Daniel Apache words, only to laugh at his clumsy accent. In those moments, fear retreated, replaced by something fiercer: love that demanded to be protected. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft gold and violet, Daniel sat on the porch with Nia. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Daniel spoke quietly. "I used to think I was done. Nothing left ahead but empty days. Now I think about next year and the year after. About teaching Coda to ride. About seeing Aya grow taller. About planting more than beans and corn." Nia looked at him, her expression softening in the fading light. "You are not done, Daniel Crowther. You have only begun again." Her words struck deep, loosening something still knotted in his chest. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. They sat together in silence, not needing more. But the peace did not last. Near the end of April, riders appeared at the edge of the clearing once more. This time, more than before, at least 6 with Miller among them. They carried themselves with the confidence of men who believed they had the law behind them. Daniel stepped forward, rifle ready but pointed low. Nia stood in the doorway, bow in hand, children behind her. Miller called out Colonel Bradley once all Indians accounted for. "Last warning, Mercer. Send them off or face the consequences." Daniel's voice rang steady. "This woman and her children are under my protection. No law worth following says otherwise." Miller's face darkened. "You'll regret standing against your own kind." Daniel held his ground. "My kind is whoever stands beside me when the wolves circle. And these are mine." The men muttered, shifting in their saddles. Rifles gleamed in the sunlight. Tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Nia's bowstring hummed faintly as she drew it tighter. For a long moment it seemed violence would explode across the clearing. Then from the woods beyond, another group of riders emerged. Not militia, but traders and settlers who had dealt with Daniel over the years. Among them was a gray-bearded man named Caleb, who had once owed Daniel his life after a snowstorm. He called out, "Miller, put your gun down. Mercer's done no wrong." The confrontation simmered, then slowly cooled. Miller spat into the dirt, furious. "This isn't over." With a sharp gesture, he turned his horse and led his men away. Daniel exhaled, tension easing only when the sound of hoofbeats faded. Caleb rode closer, eyes steady. "You got friends, Mercer. Don't forget that. Not everyone here wants blood." Daniel nodded his thanks. As the traders departed, Nia touched his arm. "Perhaps not all wolves wear fur." That night, after the children slept, Daniel and Nia sat by the fire. The danger had not passed. It had only been delayed. Yet something else lingered in the air, too. Strength unspoken but shared. "They'll come again," Daniel said quietly. Nia's hand found his. Then we meet them together. Her words, simple and certain, anchored him more than any promise of safety. For the first time in years, he felt not only willing to fight, but willing to live for something beyond himself. May brought warmth that melted the last stubborn patches of snow, turning the valley into a place alive with color. Wildflowers spread across the meadow, and the cottonwood tree by the cabin swayed with new leaves. The change in the land echoed in Daniel's chest. He no longer woke expecting silence and emptiness. He woke to Koda's laughter, to Aya's sharp questions, to the steady rhythm of Naya moving through the cabin, as though she had always belonged there. Each day carried its share of work and worry. The garden needed tending, fences mending, and every distant rider still set Daniel's hand near his rifle. But life carried more weight than fear now. Survival had become living, and living had begun to feel like hope. The children flourished in ways he had not expected. Aya's English grew stronger, her questions sharper. She beat Daniel at chess so consistently that she began teaching Koda, who insisted his pawns were warriors and his knights real horses. Koda learned to ride Duke at a slow walk, his small hands gripping the reins while Daniel walked beside him. Each laugh, each stumble, each proud smile was a thread in the fabric of a family being woven day by day. Nia remained the heart of it all. She knew when to scold and when to comfort, when to speak and when to listen. At night, when the fire burned low and the children slept, she and Daniel would sit in the quiet, their hands brushing, their eyes meeting. No vows were needed beyond the simple act of staying. Yet danger had not vanished. Rumors still drifted from the east. Militia patrols moved through settlements, restless and watchful. Daniel knew Miller had not forgotten his threats. Some nights he stood outside beneath the stars, rifle in hand, scanning the dark tree line. Wolves were not the only predators that circled. It was beneath the old cottonwood tree that Daniel and Nia finally sealed what had been growing between them. No preacher, no papers, no rings. Just the two of them, with Aya and Koda watching solemnly, their faces bright with understanding beyond their years. Hands clasped, eyes locked, they spoke the words that mattered. "You saved my children," Nia said, her voice steady, strong. "But you saved me from a life without hope. That is a debt repaid only with a lifetime." Daniel's throat tightened, his voice low but firm. "There is no debt between us now, only choice. And I choose us." The children smiled, and in that simple moment, family was born not from blood or law, but from decision and devotion. The weeks that followed proved the strength of that choice. Travelers passing through the valley spoke of the cabin where a quiet white man lived with his Apache wife and her children. Some carried curiosity, others suspicion, but none stayed long. Whispers spread that militiamen had once planned to drive them out but never dared return. Perhaps it was the knowledge that Mercer stood unshaken. Perhaps it was the quiet network of friends who had grown around him. Whatever the reason, the cabin endured. Each day etched deeper the bond between them. Koda learned to fish in the stream, bringing home small trout with proud triumph. Aya studied plants with Naya, learning which healed and which harmed. Daniel found himself teaching them not only chores, but stories. Memories of Missouri, of his wife Sarah, of lessons carved in loss. To his surprise, speaking of the past did not hollow him out anymore. It reminded him of how far he had come. Spring deepened, carrying them toward summer. The garden sprouted, high herbs filled the rafters, and laughter echoed louder than fear. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Daniel sat on the porch steps, watching Koda chase fireflies. Aya leaned against the porch rail, braiding strands of grass into patterns. Inside, Nia hummed a soft song as she stirred the pot over the fire. Daniel felt the weight of years of silence slip further away. He had once believed himself broken beyond repair, a man drifting on the edge of life. Now he sat surrounded by warmth, by laughter, by the fragile but undeniable strength of family. Nia stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her skirt, her eyes meeting his. "The path north is still there," she said quietly. "But perhaps it is no longer ours." He rose, reaching for her hand. "No," he said. "Ours is here." Her fingers twined with his, steady and sure. Aya looked up, catching the moment, and smiled. Koda shouted triumphantly as he caught a firefly in his cupped hands. The cabin behind them glowed with lamplight. The meadow shimmered with color, and the cottonwood tree whispered in the breeze. Within those walls and beneath that sky, something rare had taken root. Not built from obligation, not bound by law, but chosen freely fiercely against all odds. In a land where winter could grip for months and wolves both human and beast prowled the edges, they had found the warmest truth of all. Family, Daniel realized, was not given, it was made. And once made, it could withstand anything.